Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Today we'll be discussing the Chapter 9 material, which deals with attraction and close relationships. I'm not feeling very well today, so forgive me if I seem a little bit off, or if I have to keep pausing the video in order to blow my nose or cough or something like that. So let's get going with the material. As we said, Chapter 9 deals with the issues of attraction and close relationships. So some of the issues that we'll be talking about are: why are we attracted to some people and indifferent or repelled by other people? Also, what determines how our emotional relationships evolve over time, and what does it mean to love someone, and what problems are likely to arise throughout these types of romantic relationships or intimate relationships. Well, we can start where we pretty much always start with these lectures, and that's with our need to belong, right? This innate, basic, fundamental motive that humans have to belong to groups and to be part of, say, to be connected with other people. So, as we've been saying all semester, we care deeply about what other people think of us. Our group memberships help form our self-concept, help form what we think of ourselves, who we think of ourselves, right? So those with a network of, say, close social ties tend to be happier, tend to be healthier, and tend to be more satisfied than those who are more isolated or more lonely, who don't have these strong connections with other people. What we've been seeing in recent years is that the way that humans connect has been changing, and particularly because of things like social media, the internet. This data here, you can see, is pretty old, going to only 2009. So this trend has just continued onwards from this point. But you could just see in this short period of time being represented in this graph, just over the course of these 4 years here, the number of Facebook friends that was in this particular group of college students had increased dramatically, right? More than doubled in this short period of time. And this might seem like a good thing, that people are making more friends, there's more connection. But research shows over and over again that these tend to be very superficial relationships. They're not intimate at all. So research also shows that it's not really important how many friends that we have. It's the closeness of those friendships. So when we talk about social media, how much intimacy is there actually? Typically not a lot, right? So people are getting or feeling more and more alone, even though they're having more and more of these friends, these online friends. So when it comes to the need to affiliate, or the thrill of affiliation, we have this, again, innate desire to establish and maintain relationships that are rewarding to us. And when I say relationships that are rewarding, they don't necessarily have to be good relationships, right? For a relationship to be rewarding, it means that it's fulfilling some need of ours. So there are plenty of people who are in bad relationships, that are in unhealthy or unstable relationships, but they're rewarding in some way, right? They're fulfilling some type of need that person has. So we have this desire to affiliate with other people, but it's not a constant level, right? Sometimes we want to affiliate with people more than others. Sometimes we want to be left alone. There's kind of a balance that we have of needing to belong and needing to be around other people, and also needing to be away from other people, needing time for ourselves. We try to strive for that type of equilibrium there. So there are certain situations in which our need to affiliate will be stronger, and those are typically when we're stressed out or when we're suffering some low self-esteem. Couldn't get that word out. So there's this famous common saying that misery loves company. The research actually shows that misery tends to love miserable company, meaning when we're feeling down, when we're feeling stressed out or scared or whatever the case may be, we want to affiliate with people who are in those same type of situations. It kind of makes us feel better to be around other people who are going through the same thing that we are going through. When it comes to feeling lonely or powerless, this will also motivate people to connect with others. So when we're feeling alone, or when we feel that life isn't going our way, we might seek out other people to help us feel less lonely, or to give our lives some more direction, or to motivate us to actually improve things or move forward with things. So humans, being the social creatures that we are, what happens when we don't have this affiliation, or we don't have the types of affiliations that we want or that we need? Well, this often leads to loneliness. And loneliness, we can define this as a feeling of deprivation about existing social relations. So either we don't have them, or they're not satisfying a particular need that we have. A personality trait, which again, we're not big on personality traits in social psych, but this notion of shyness, of being introverted, tends to contribute to social isolation, which in turn will contribute to loneliness. And there are a number of different ways that we try to cope with loneliness, and some are effective and some aren't as effective. But typically when we talk about loneliness, we can think of loneliness as being made up of three different components, or three different facets, right? The first, and each one is represented by the distance from this person here in this image. Loneliness has this intimate component, and we're talking about intimacy, meaning this really close, small group of friends, right? So you see there, it's an N of 5 on average. And most research shows that you don't really need a whole lot of friends to be socially fulfilled. You need a small group of very close friends. So this is what we mean by that intimate component. So these small groups of people who you could really rely on, who are always going to be there, in a sense, right? Then we have a relational component, and these are your friends, right? Your best friends, or your partner, or say even intimacy. This doesn't necessarily mean romantic, right? So it could even be as having a family member, a brother or sister, just someone who's really close. And then the relational, we're taking it out a little further. So these would be your friends. Not your best friends necessarily, but people that you like, people who you get along with. Even your acquaintances you could throw in there. And it's about 15 to 50 or so. And this is about how many friends we can reasonably have and keep track of, and have meaningful types of relationships with. And then we have the collective, the sense of belonging we have to a group, or to a larger community. And we don't even need to know all the people that are in this collective, because take a look at the size of it, anywhere from 150 to 500 people or so. This is our sense of belonging to a greater group or a greater community. So feeling deficient in any one of these three facets can lead to feelings of loneliness. You might have some really good, intimate friends or partners, have a good extended group of friendship, but really don't feel like you belong to any community or any group in any meaningful way, and still feel a sense of loneliness there. Okay, so when it comes to the people who we seek out relationships with, the people who we're going to let's say feel this initial attraction, and that attraction can be physical or emotional, or it could just be a liking type of attraction. It's just, who are we attracted to, right? In any of those ways. Well, we are attracted to people with whom a relationship is either directly or indirectly rewarding. So going back to what I said before, relationships, you might look at some, maybe even some of the relationships you're in or have with others, and say, what am I doing with this person? Why am I friends with this person? Well, it might not be obvious that this relationship is rewarding. It might be indirectly rewarding. It might be fulfilling some need that you have, that you don't realize that you have. Or it might be fulfilling a need that you have that's not necessarily a good need. So if we think of ourselves as, maybe we don't think very highly of ourselves, maybe we have low self-esteem, and we are in relationships or have relationships where people who kind of treat us like crap, they're basically treating us in a way that validates how we think of ourselves, right? So that relationship is rewarding, even though it's not good. It's not a healthy relationship, but it's still rewarding in that sense. So all humans are going to exhibit patterns of attraction and mate selection that favor the conception that can favor conception, birth, and survival of their offspring, at least according to the evolutionary perspective, right? And we're going to see some challenges to this perspective, both in terms of its theory and in terms of research that actually doesn't necessarily support this notion that all humans are going to exhibit these patterns all of the time, right? It's a lot more nuanced than that, but according to the evolutionary perspective, this is what it's about. So even our friendships, the people we tend to try to associate with, it's still rooted in, how are these friends going to benefit me in my ability to conceive, to give birth, to keep my genes going, right? To keep my offspring alive. So the way that people meet, as we has just seen in terms of the number of friends that people have, and put friends in quotations there, on social media, how this has increased. The way that people meet has been transformed by the internet, particularly online dating, and not even the internet now. It's not even online dating. They're just dating apps or hookup apps, right? We're not even meeting people anymore. We're swiping left or swiping right based on what they look like, and pretty much how those apps work. And nobody's really sure what the long-term consequences of this new way of meeting people, potential mates, what are the long-term consequences of this? How is it going to, do they develop into relationships? What are those relationships like? How do they compare to, say, more traditional types of ways that people meet up? Well, there's still research being done on it. Nobody's quite sure. There are, there's a whole long line of research looking at attraction and physical attraction, into emotional and sexual attraction, but also our friendships. Just who were we attracted to in general? Who do we like in general? And the research, there's some pretty strong predictors in there. One of them is familiarity. So we tend to like people who are like us, right? Or people who we're familiar with, who we know better, in a sense. So to whom are we most likely to become attracted? Well, one is the proximity effect. People who are closest to us, who are nearer to us, literally, right? Who are literally closer to us. We have the proximity effect and the mere exposure effect. And these two kind of go hand in hand, in a sense. But when it comes to liking people, who you're more likely to like, it's going to be somebody who's around you, right? Who's closer to you, physically closer to you, the proximity effect, and the mere exposure effect. People who you see more frequently, who you see more often. So the proximity effect, the single best predictor of attraction is physical proximity, or how close somebody is to you. There are plenty of studies that show this, and a lot of research. Most research is done with college students. So it's no surprise that a lot of these research findings, show this effect in terms of college students and their proximity in terms of living conditions on campuses, right? So where we live influences the friends that we make, and where we live influences the potential mates that we have. Line of research has shown that college students tend to date other college students who live more nearby or in the same type of housing as them. So you're more likely to date someone else. If you're living in a dorm, you're more likely to date someone who's living in a dorm. And if you're living on one side of the campus, you're more likely to date someone who's living on that same side of the campus rather than on the completely other side of the campus. In fact, you're most likely to date someone who's living in your building, right? And why is that the case? Well, a number of reasons. It's, again, the person is closer to you, so there's more opportunities for you to interact with them. The person, you're likely to see them more often, so the mere exposure effect comes into play, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the mere exposure effect simply says that we tend to like things the more that we're exposed to them. Just simply seeing somebody more frequently will help in you liking them or developing an attraction to that person. But someone who lives closer to you is just easier to develop a relationship. It's easier to go on dates. It's easier to hook up. It's easier to whatever, right? They're right down the hall, or right down the street, or right on the other side of campus. You don't have to make a whole big production out of it. You can just pop in, right? So the proximity effect is definitely there, definitely exists. It's so powerful that it can even be demonstrated on a pretty basic level, something that you might not even think that the proximity effect would have any type of effect. And this is on one study here showing the likelihood, or this isn't likelihood, it's intensity. So how strong of a friendship that's developed among students who are in the same class. So they're just taking a class together. Students who had no physical relation to each other, so just they were sitting on different sides of the classroom, let's say. Friendships that develop out of those types of situations, you could say had the lowest intensity compared to students who were sitting in the same row as one another. So students who were just sitting in the same row, who were physically closer to each other, developed more intense friendships. And then finally, students who were sitting next to one another, so the students who were closest to one another, had the most intense levels of friendship. So the proximity effect, in effect, right there, just talking about who you're sitting next to in a classroom and developing a friendship with them, how deep or how close is that relationship or that friendship? Well, at least part of it can be explained by how close you sat next to them in a classroom. Okay, so the mere exposure effect. Alright, my ear is clogged and this thing is bothering me so much. Okay, so the mere exposure effect, we talked about this already, but it's the phenomenon whereby the more often people are exposed to a stimulus, the more positively they'll come to evaluate that stimulus. So you can think about, say, election day. Anytime there's an election every year, you're just going to see these ads, and these ads, and they just show the candidates' names over and over and over again. You can drive around and see yard signs and billboards of just the candidate's name over and over and over again. Advertising, you just see the name of a brand over and over and over again. All of them are relying on the mere exposure effect. The more you see this name, right, the more you're going to like it. And this is a pretty powerful effect, pretty established effect. And there are a number of explanations as to why it happens. One being, well, we spoke about first impressions and how difficult first impressions are to overcome, because you usually get only one shot to make a first impression. Say you make a bad first impression, well, anytime this person, now you made a bad impression, this person's going to try to avoid you, so you're not going to really have many opportunities to make a good impression after that. But let's say, you're forced to be with them in the same room or to interact with them over time. Well, then you're around them more. They're exposed to you more. There are more and more opportunities for you to kind of undo that initial bad first impression that you had. Another explanation is that we just tend to like things that we're more familiar with. And there's an old, folk saying that familiarity breeds contempt. Meaning, we tend to get bored with, or we tend to, not like things that are constant or that are always around, right? That the opposite is true. You should play hard to get. You should try to not spend too much time with your partner. Keep wanting them to want more. That's actually the opposite of what the research suggests, is that familiarity does not breed contempt. We actually like things that we're more familiar with. We see this when it comes to online interaction as well, right? So in this study, participants were paired up with other participants, or maybe even a bot, some computer program. I think in the study they were actually talking to real participants, and they had participants, talk to the same people over a number of different chats, over a number of different times. And in this first graph here, we see the ratings of the partner. So how highly did they rate them in terms of how cool were they, how nice were they? What do you think of them? Higher scores being positive. Well, here's the first chat, right? First time they spoke to the person. By the second time, their rating of that person went up. Their likability rating of this partner went up pretty significantly there, right? Kind of leveled off over the next few chats, and then it went back up again. And this is likely to keep continuing. Like the more that these participants were talking to this person, the more they liked them. And this is also reflected in the second chart here. So the number of chats, right, that these participants were having. And on the y-axis here, the desire to stay in contact with this person. So, the first time you had a conversation with them, kind of rated it pretty low, like, yeah, I don't care if I talk to this person again or not, right? By the second time, though, we're up to 40% there. That's a pretty significant increase. By 8 chats, just online chats, right? Just complete strangers. At that point, they're no longer a stranger, with 8 chats, right? We're over 60% that people would want to stay in contact with this person. So yeah, the more they spoke to these people, the more they liked them, and the more that they wanted to stay in touch with them, right? Okay, so another factor that is pretty reliable in terms of who we're going to be attracted to is physical attractiveness. So we react more favorably to people who are physically attractive than to people who are not physically attractive. So it's definitely good to be attractive. There is a very clear bias for beauty, and it's seen throughout the research and in every possible setting. There's what we call the beauty advantage is pretty pervasive. It exists in pretty much every facet of our society here. The question, of course, is always, is beauty subjective or objective? Is beauty really in the eye of the beholder? And it really depends, right? There's research to suggest both, that it's both objective, that there are some standards and certain characteristics that we just inherently find more attractive, and then there's evidence to suggest that beauty is also subjective, right? So let's talk a little bit about both. In terms, or in the column of beauty being objective, we have research that shows high levels of agreement for facial ratings across ages and across cultures, right? So meaning people of different age groups, from different cultures, we all tend to agree on, at least when it comes to faces, right? What's attractive and what's not attractive. So we're taking out or controlling for, say, age, we're controlling for even gender effects, controlling for cultural effects. We all tend to agree. We know attractiveness when we see it, essentially. Also, physical features of the face are reliably associated with judgments of attractiveness, particularly facial symmetry. So Tons of research that shows what happens when you make a face more or less symmetrical. Well, more symmetrical faces will be judged as more attractive. Less symmetrical faces will be judged as less attractive. So we know that certain physical features are reliably associated with overall judgments of attractiveness. We also have research that shows that babies, newborn infants, who have not yet been exposed to societal beauty standards, will stare or will look at faces that are considered attractive by adults, what we would rate as attractive. Infants will spend significantly more time looking at those faces than faces that the adults have judged as being unattractive. So some pretty compelling findings to suggest that some part of attractiveness is objective, that there are some components to beauty that are inherent, right? That we find, some components that we find attractive are inherent to us. So let's take a look at the flip side, that beauty is subjective. Well, people from different cultures enhance their beauty in very different ways, right? And different cultures, we could even talk about, different time periods within the same culture. People will enhance their beauty in different ways. Just take a look at, different styles of clothing and hairstyles and whatnot from the 20s and the 30s and 40s and the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s today, right? It seems like every decade there's a new look, there's a new standard as to what's attractive or not attractive in our society, within our own society, right? Across societies, you often see even bigger differences in terms of how people will alter their beauty or alter their attractiveness, rather, or what is deemed to be attractive. The most obvious example is that in cultures where food is scarce, being more robust, being girthier, being thicker, let's say, is generally deemed as being more attractive, right? And in cultures where food is very abundant, like ours, right? We're very rich, calorie-rich food is all around us. Being thinner, being slimmer is typically seen as being more attractive, right? So clearly there's a cultural shift, and as, say, poorer nations, where food scarcity is a thing, as they become, say, richer nations, and food scarcity becomes less of an issue, then their standards start to change. So clearly that's a column for beauty being subjective, right? A check in that column. So we said ideal body shapes vary across cultures as well as among different racial groups within a culture. So even within a particular culture, there could be subcultures or different subgroups or subcultures that have their own beauty standards or have different beauty standards. As I said, standards of beauty tend to change over time. And of course, situational factors can influence judgment of beauty. What are some situational factors? Well, one you've definitely heard of, called beer goggles, right? So, alcohol will tend to change the way that we see or judge people's attractiveness, and typically also as your options decrease, as you're at the bar and people are leaving, That person who you didn't really think much of when you first got there, all of a sudden they're not looking so bad after all, right? Because there's really not a whole lot of people left at this point. So situational factors can affect how we attract or how we rate people's attractiveness. So what is beauty? Who knows? It's a combination of both these objective factors and these subjective factors. Okay, let me take a quick break here. I'll be right back. Okay, so the benefits and costs of beauty. There's definitely a beauty advantage. Attractive people have a lot of benefits in our society, right? So good-looking people tend to have more friends. They tend to have better social skills. Tend to have a more active sex life, and they are more likely to attract a mate, to attract a partner. But being beautiful, being good-looking doesn't guarantee health or happiness or even high self-esteem. So even though there's these social benefits, that doesn't necessarily translate into physical or emotional, psychological benefits. One of the reasons being is that people who are extremely good looking might have attributional problems, meaning that they don't know whether or not someone is praising them because they really did a job well done, or that they're really smart or really talented at a task, or whether the person might be praising them because essentially they want to get in their pants, right? So people can struggle with this because you can imagine what that might do to your self-esteem, and whether or not you could really trust certain people and trust what they're saying about you. And remember, from the Looking Glass self model of self-concept, that's how we come to know each other, or know ourselves rather, is by what we think other people think about us, right? So we can never be sure if we're always doubting it. You can imagine that's going to have an effect on our self-concept. Another, say, cost of being beautiful is the immense pressure that this person would have in order to maintain their appearance. And you can see this particularly, among people whose job it is to look good, actors and actresses and models, right? As we age, things aren't what they used to be. Aging is a process, that can be done gracefully or not so gracefully, or maybe something in between. But yeah, people whose job it is to look good so they can have work will sometimes go through really extreme procedures, plastic surgery, to try to maintain that appearance. It tends to be overdone and tends to kind of have the opposite effect. But there's lots of pressure on us to look good, period, in general, right? All of us, but particularly for people who are really attractive, then they've had all of these benefits that come from being attractive. There's going to be pressure to maintain their attractiveness, and when it's not successful, this can cause or not as successful as they would like. This could lead to some severe problems for them, and lead them to even more drastic type of measures. So overall, the research suggests that being beautiful is a mixed blessing. Definitely has its advantages, without a doubt, there. But it also has its downfalls, because nature will catch up with you In the end, I mean, well, ultimately, gravity is going to get you, right? So the research suggests that there's little relationship between appearance in your youth and your later happiness. So you might say, well, what do you mean? If I were a 10, I would be so happy. Yeah, you might think that, right? But the research doesn't really pan out. You'll be happy in some ways and less happy in other ways, right? Okay, so when it comes to first encounters, when we first meet people, how do these relationships, let's say, how do these first encounters go on to develop into friendships or into sexual partnerships or what have you, right? Well, we tend to associate with people who are similar to us. What we spoke about before. We tend to like people who are like us, right? There are 4 types of similarities that tend to be most relevant. So, demographic similarities, we spoke about that already in terms of the physical proximity effect. But also we tend to like people who kind of come from the same town that we came from. Oh, you're from Long Island? I'm from Long Island too, right? Oh, you went to SUNY Oneonta? I went there too, right? So that's a type of shared similarity. And when it comes to demographic similarities, that means there was lots of things you have in common. But if you went to the same school, maybe you had the same professors, maybe you had the same friends, maybe you had a lot of these same shared experiences, right? That just come from where you come from, where you've been. Another similarity that's most relevant is the similarities in our attitudes. We tend to like people who like the same things that we do. It's rare that you would find, people who are extremely politically on this side of the aisle with someone who's extremely politically on that side of the aisle, unless, they both really just love to argue about politics. Then they're perfect for each other. They're very similar in that regard, right? Number 4, attractiveness. So we tend to be attracted, or we tend to end up with people who have a similar level of attractiveness as we do. So the 10s go with the 10s, the 1s and 2s go with the 1s and 2s, and everyone in the middle tends to go with everyone in the middle. Generally speaking, of course. But yeah, if you're with somebody, you have a partner, and you doubt your attractiveness, well, if you find them attractive, chances are you're attractive as well, right? Because people tend to match up on levels of attractiveness. And finally, subjective experiences. So I mentioned this a little bit in terms of demographics, how being from the same place, you are likely to at least be exposed to some of the same things. But subjective experiences, these are things that are kind of unique to us. But if you find another person has had this type of experience as well, then yeah, we would be attracted to them. And again, not necessarily just physically or romantically attracted, but even just from a liking perspective. Is that, wow, you went to Europe during for high school study abroad. I did too, right? Things like that. We tend to like other people who've had similar experiences to us. Okay, so according to the 2-stage model of attraction, what we first do before we decide that we're going to continue on to try to continue on staying attracted to this person or liking this person or trying to pursue a friendship or something more than a friendship with this person, is that we go through a 2-stage model of basically screening them out. So we first meet people, Then we have what's called the negative system, or the negative screening system, or negative screen of dissimilarity. So what we're first doing before we even start, to determine, whether or not this person has good things about them that we like, we first determine whether they're similar to us or not, right? So we meet someone and we're like, okay, this person is not like me. They're dissimilar. Okay, if we decide that this person's not like us, that they're dissimilar, then we avoid them. It just ends right then and there, right? If we determine that this person is not so dissimilar to us, then the second stage kicks in, and this is the positive screen of similarity. So we determine, okay, they're not dissimilar, but how similar are they, right? Are they kind of only a little similar to us? If that's the case, we might have feelings of indifference. And you said, okay, well, they're not dissimilar, but they're not all that similar. Meh, right? But if we find out that there's a high level of similarity, then that's likely to lead to feelings of attractiveness, and likely that's going to lead us to want to continue associating with this person. Again, that could be even just on a friendship level, but also as a potential mate, right? Okay, so we like others who are similar. People tend to become involved romantically with others who are equivalent in their physical attractiveness. We said this already, and this is related to what's known as the matching hypothesis, right? So how similar we are to each other in terms of attractiveness, in terms of demographics, in terms of attitudes, in terms of subjective experiences, all of those four major factors that we talked about, how similar we are is actually very predictive of how a relationship is going to end up. So more similarity tends to lead to a longer or better progress within a relationship. The more dissimilar you are, the more likely the relationship is not going to go anywhere, or that it's going to end. And again, that's romantic relationships and friendships as well. Interestingly enough, we tend to like people who like us, right? So, always make this joke when I teach in class, is that, this person, you might have never noticed them, don't even know their name, but, a friend of yours comes up and says, hey, so-and-so, likes you. All of a sudden, you're like, wait, who's so-and-so, right? Now, all of a sudden, you're interested. Who's this? Who likes me? I like me. They like me. Wow, we must have so much in common, right? Well, yeah, it kind of works that way. As soon as you find out someone likes you, all of a sudden, you're interested in this person. Now, you might turn out like, okay, yeah, no, thank you. But at least it initially piqued your curiosity there. You want to know more about this person. And what's likely happening here is that, we want people, we like people who like us, because we are looking for this type of balance in a relationship. And balance in a relationship is characterized by reciprocity. So we'll see in a minute here, there are different types of relationships, but the ones where we have an emotional connection or an emotional investment tend to be based on this mutual exchange, this kind of give and take that happens. So if you have a friend who always gives, or rather who always takes and never gives, well, then they're not reciprocating, and you're not likely to be friends with them anymore, right? Or at least the closeness of that relationship, that friendship, is likely to to decrease in that sense, right? So we like people who like us, particularly if they're selective in their liking, right? So if this person doesn't like a lot of people, but they like me, well, they have good taste, right? There's something special about that person. So what about this notion of playing hard to get? Because we just said, well, we like people who like us, particularly if they're selective. So what if, we want to we don't want to come off as too needy. We want people to know, like, hey, I got other options. We want to want to play cool, right? Well, when we do this hard to get effect, this of course, the tendency to prefer people who are highly selective in their social choices over those who are more readily available. And again, sometimes this is that cat and mouse type of game we play to kind of get the person to like us or to remain interested in us. Why? Well, because we tend to be turned off by people who reject us. So what happens with this cat and mouse game is that, playing hard to get can be good in small amounts, right? Trying to get not appear too needy. The problem that you could run into is that if you play too hard to get, then the person is likely to give up interest. They're likely to say, well, this person's not interested in me. I am not interested in them anymore. And that happens because social rejection is really bad for us as humans. Remember, we have such a strong need to belong that when we're rejected socially, or we're rejected by a group, this is really devastating for us, right? So be careful when it comes to playing hard to get. It's good because we want people who are highly selective, but you can easily take it too far and the person will lose interest in you because they don't want to be rejected by you, right? Okay, so when it comes to mate selection, we mentioned earlier the evolutionary perspective, and the evolutionary perspective essentially says that males and females are going to look for different things in a sexual partner. According to evolutionary theory on mate selection, let's say women need to be more selective in their mates. Why? Well, because they're biologically limited in the number of children that they can have. Women have only a certain number of eggs, right? And they only have a certain number of years where they can bear children. And having a child is really taxing on your body. And keeping it alive is also typically will fall most of that responsibility towards the woman. So according to this theory, women need to be more selective, whereas men have a virtually unlimited number of sperm cells. They can father children up till the day they die, so they can be much more indiscriminate about their mates, right? In fact, from an evolutionary standpoint, it would make sense for men to try to mate with as many partners as possible, try to inseminate as many women as possible, according to this theory. Whereas women need to be, much more careful. It's a much bigger investment for women than for men, according to the theory. So, how true is this, right? Well, the stereotype is that men are more likely to chase after sex, and women are more likely to seek love. But when we take a look at some of the research, it's really not as simple as that. In this study, researchers asked, they surveyed a whole bunch of men here, and then basically find out who is the first person to say "I love you" in a relationship. So these are the beliefs, what people believe, who the first person to say "I love you" is. 65% women, 35% men, right? So most people believe that women are the first person to say "I love you" in a relationship. Then they ask people, well, think about your last relationship. Who said "I loved you" first? Well, it turned out to be the opposite, right? Almost 65% of men said "I love you" first in relationships that were recalled, right? So what people believed to be true and what people remembered to be true were almost completely flipped, complete opposite. And then they asked, well, the researchers asked, how about the current relationship, the relationship you're in right now? And take a look at the number. It's even higher, right? Almost 70%, 75% in current relationships, men were the first ones to say "I love you." They could be skeptical here and say, well, yeah, they're saying that because they want sex, right? But I would say, then where does the belief come in? So I'm not sure this is a definitive, study or a definitive piece of research at all, but it certainly is interesting. It's certainly something to consider here. In current relationships and last recalled relationships, overwhelmingly men were the first people to say "I love you" in the relationship, right? And of course these are heterosexual relationships that the researchers were studying. Okay, so according to the evolutionary perspective, the reasons why men and women become jealous are also different, right? Because the reasons what men and women are seeking in these relationships are different. So jealousy, the reasons why men and women would become jealous would be different as well. Of course, jealousy is a very common and completely normal human reaction. Nothing wrong with being jealous, except that it can become extreme and can lead to controlling or even violent types of behaviors. But jealousy in and of itself is completely normal and usually harmless, right? If anything, jealousy could be beneficial in terms of keeping a relationship closer together, keeping the people in a relationship, at least if it's a monogamous relationship, keeping them more committed to one another. So, according to the evolutionary perspective, men will be more upset by sexual infidelity because they're worried about potential paternal uncertainty, right? So men, according to this theory, evolutionary theory, say, yeah, they're going to be more concerned about sexual infidelity because they're not going to know if this kid that they're investing all this time and money and resources and risking their lives for, whatever the case may be, if it's theirs or if it's some other dude's, right? And according to this theory, women are going to be more upset by emotional infidelity because they're worried that their male partner will leave them and take all of his resources and take all of his support with him, right? And basically leaving her to raise this child or children by herself. So when it comes from a sociological or social psychological perspective, what does it say in terms of say the differences in why men and women become jealous? Well, the research is actually not that clear whether there's any truth behind that. But some studies, I mean, the research is mixed, essentially, right? But if we take this socio-cultural perspective here, greater gender parity is associated with less gender differentiation in mating preferences and gender differences in why people become jealous. In other words, the more economic power women have within a society or within a time period, let's say within a time period within a society, the more economic power women have, the more important physical attractiveness of their partner becomes to them, right? So it seems that as women, have more, say, equality in terms of economic power, they start to care more about physical appearance. Just like the research was suggesting that men tend to care more about physical appearance and less so about, say, economic support. The idea being that physical appearance is associated with good genes, having a good partner who's going to be able to pass on your genes, fertility and health and whatnot. So sociocultural researchers offer another explanation for jealousy as well, and it's that men may be concerned about the threat of loss rather than paternal certainty. In other words, yeah, men might actually like the woman that they're with, and they're afraid of losing them to another guy, right? And it's not just, I'm upset, that she's screwing around because I might raise a kid that's not mine. No, maybe, men don't only think about sex, right? Maybe most of the time, but not always. So when again it comes to, say, ideal, what we would say is ideal in a partner and what actually exists, they tend to be different things, right? So again, in the survey here, asking men and women about the importance or what they prefer in a hypothetical partner. So think about, your what do you prefer in a partner? How important is physical attractiveness? Okay, men rated physical attractiveness as being more important than women did, and women rated economic earning prospects, economic progress, money, earning progress, success, job prospects, what have you, as being more important than men did. But then the researchers asked about the preferences in terms of your actual partners, right? So in your actual partners, how important are these things? And take a look, physical attractiveness, this is no difference there, right? So hypothetically, men care more about looks than women do, but in reality, they don't. In reality, they don't, right? And when it comes to earning prospects, that effect for women disappeared. No difference, right? So what's this about, the hypothetical part? I would argue, from a social psychological perspective, that this is what we're supposed to say, or what we were taught to say, right? This is gender stereotypes at work, gender stereotypes affecting our answers, or these participants' answers, in terms of hypothetical partners. But when it comes to actual partners, there are no gender differences in terms of what we prefer in mates. Okay, so taking a look at these intimate relationships, let's look at them a little closer and what happens within these intimate relationships. So a close relationship between two adults involving, what is an intimate relationship, essentially, what we're getting at here. Well, look, it's a close relationship between two adults that involves emotional attachment, fulfilling of psychological needs, or interdependence, right? So how do first encounters evolve into relationships? Does it happen by stages, or does it, happen by leaps and bounds? Is it kind of a slow, steady process, or is it kind of like fall madly in love, right? What happens here? And also, what are the qualitative differences in close relationships? What fundamentally is different between friendships and love? And clearly it's not just sex, because there's such a thing as friends with benefits, right? But friendship, love, and romantic love tend to be different things. So let's take a look at each of these questions here. So when it comes to types of intimate relationships that exist out there, social exchange theory is a perspective that views people as motivated to maximize their benefits and to minimize their costs in relationships with others. So according to social exchange theory, certain relationships exist where we're going to try to maximize how much we get out of the relationship and minimize how much we put in to the relationship. This would be a horrible approach to take for a romantic or an intimate relationship, because it's essentially one person always trying to kind of screw the other one over. And this is not something that we tend to value, right? We'll come back to this, don't worry about that. This is what I wanted to talk about here. What we're typically interested in is not necessarily maximizing our rewards and minimizing our costs. Instead, we're looking for balance, or we're looking for reciprocity, right? So equity theory says that it's not just about minimizing costs and maximizing rewards. It's about the ratio of your costs to benefits being equal to the ratio of your partner's costs and benefits, right? So that both people are putting in a fair amount of costs and receiving their fair share of benefits out. It's not equality. These two ratios don't have to line up exactly in terms of, say, you have to put in exactly what your partner puts in, and you have to get out exactly what your partner gets out. Instead, it needs to be balanced. It needs to be a fair arrangement. These ratios can change over time, right? So if you have a good job, and say your partner's going back to school or something, you might have to contribute more to the bills and more to household type of stuff for the time being, while they're earning their degree, while they're finishing college, right? So these ratios don't always have to be 100% all the time, especially if we're talking about long-term type of committed relationships. But you should be getting rewards in different ways. The relationship should be rewarding in other ways that don't involve, say, rent or household chores or something. So exchange relationships are primarily, relying on that, or social exchange theory pretty much explains exchange relationships, where we want strict reciprocity. If you go to a store and you pay money for an object, you want that object, right? I give you something, you give me something. That's it. Equity theory is better at explaining these communal type of relationships, where participants expect and desire mutual responsiveness to each other's needs. So it doesn't have to be strict reciprocity, because I spent this much on your birthday gift, you have to spend that much on my birthday gift. That doesn't need to happen in these communal relationships. In an exchange relationship, yeah, tit for tat, right? I do this for you, you do this for me. So there are different types of relationships out there. Let me go. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I had to sneeze. Okay, so we have these different types of relationships that can exist. Something that is going to, say, play a role in the nature of your relationship, how a relationship progresses, or some of the issues that might come about within a relationship, is your attachment style and the attachment style of your partner in that relationship. So an attachment style is the way a person typically interacts with significant others. And some questions that we could ask, and that you have covered in personality theory, or you will cover when you take personality theory, is the attachment style we had with our parents related to the attachment style that we exhibit in our romantic relationships? And another question that we can ask is, does the attachment style you endorse today forecast potential outcomes in future relationships? Well, when it comes to the different attachment styles that exist, there are three. The first is a secure attachment style, and people with the secure attachment style find it relatively easy to get close to other people, and are comfortable depending on other people and having them depend on them. So people with secure attachment styles don't often worry about being abandoned or about somebody getting too close to them. And the majority of people tend to have a secure attachment style. So in this particular study here, using a university college student sample and a sample of participants they just got from newspaper ads, the researchers found 56% of both of these samples demonstrated a secure attachment style. About 25% split the difference, 24% between these two samples exhibited an avoidant attachment style. So people who have avoidant attachment style are somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. They might find it difficult to trust people completely, or to allow them to depend on other people. They tend to get nervous or anxious when someone gets too close, and often want to be more, the partners want to be more intimate with them, not just physically intimate, but even more emotionally intimate than people with avoidant attachment styles might be comfortable with, right? So they tend to be more distant there. And then finally, again, splitting the difference between the two samples, about 20% exhibited an anxious attachment style. So when it comes to an anxious attachment style, people who have this type of style are reluctant to get close to others, or as close as they would like to. They often worry that their partner doesn't really love them, or that they really don't want to be with them. They'll tend to try to completely merge with that other person as a way to make sure that they don't leave them, right? So they'll try to be as committed or as overly committed as possible, make this other person dependent upon them, so to speak. And this will often scare people away, right? So when we get back to the two questions that we asked, like, one, does the way that we interacted with our parents lead to these different types of attachment styles we exhibit with others? The short answer is yes, right? And do these attachment styles affect, our future relationships? Short answer is yes. As you can see, the various types of problems that that could come up, particularly with an anxious attachment style, but also with an avoidant style as well. It doesn't mean all is lost, though, right? You can work on these things. Okay, theories of love. So we were asking, how do relationships progress here? Well, Sternberg's triangular theory of love proposes that love has 3 basic components to it, right? So intimacy, passion, and commitment. And we'll take a look at each of these separately, but these 3 components can be combined to produce 8 different subtypes of love, right? So let's take a look at Sternberg's triangle here. We have intimacy. So intimacy is liking. So you like someone. You want to be close to this person. You like having them around, right? We go down here, and we have passion. So passion, this is, well, as the name suggests, this is that romantic, sexual type of desire that you have, like pure passion, pure sexual type of energy. And over here we have commitment. So the commitment, this is, well, as the name suggests, is when you feel this is secure, trusting type of stable relationship with the person. Okay, so when you have intimacy just by itself, when you just like having the person around, we call this just liking, right? So this would be a friend, or even an acquaintance, who you just like having around. Is intimacy alone, right? When you combine intimacy and passion, so you like the person, you get along with them, you share interest with them, and you're very sexually interested in them, we would call this romantic love. When you take intimacy and you combine this with commitment, so we're not just talking about liking a person and wanting them around, but there's also this commitment, there's this secureness, there's this dependable relationship there. Sternberg calls that companionate love, right? So this is a really close type of friend, or even a very close type of family member. We don't have a lot of these relationships, right? When you have passion and commitment without liking, this is what Sternberg calls fatuous love, right? So maybe the sex is really good, if you're really turned on by this person, you depend on them, maybe there's shared financial interests, and there's kids involved, whatever the reason that's keeping the two of you together and dependent on each other, but you really just don't like each other. You can't stand the person. You don't really want them around, except for sex, I guess, right? The best kind of love, or most complete kind of love for a romantic partner, according to Sternberg, would be consummate love, having all 3 of these components. So liking the person, wanting them around, enjoying their company, being sexually attracted to them, enjoying the sex that you're having with them, and also having this type of commitment, this type of dependability, and this type of stableness. Okay, so according to Sternberg, there's different components to love, and again, he says consummate love is should be the goal, or is ideal for a romantic, intimate relationship. Okay, so how does culture, attraction, and love kind of interact? Our attraction, desire, relationships, and love the same for people all over the world. Well, it seems that passionate love is widespread and is a universal emotion. Basically, yeah, we're sexual beings. We want to have sex, right? Not everybody, but most people do. So this type of passionate love, infatuation that you feel, seems to be universal, except that it's not universally necessary for marriage. So there's still plenty of cultures that exist that have arranged marriages, where there's no passionate component to that relationship. When it comes to the cultural influence on mate selection and love, it's really complex. Again, different cultures are dictated by different social norms. Different cultures, forbid certain types of marriages or certain types of even interactions between different groups. Also, the different types of images that we're exposed to in the media, in the different types of, say, examples of relationships that we're exposed to in the media can all affect, say, what we think we want or what we think we should want in a partner or in a marriage. So yeah, the answer to that question is, yeah, it's complex. Too complex for mentioning in this chapter. Just understand that those things interact. Our culture is important when it comes to what we find attractive and also what we think we want within certain relationships. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides here because I am not feeling well. But when it comes to sexuality, we talked about different types of love, passionate love, companionate love. You can read through these if my explanations weren't that great. When it comes to sexual orientation, one thing I'll say is that most of the research, well, pretty much all the research that we discuss in this chapter, it deals with heterosexual relationships and monogamous relationships. And we know when it comes to sexuality and sexual orientation, things are much more complicated than just these dichotomies that are presented in this research. So just understand that a lot of the research that has been done on relationships, in intimate relationships, are typically done with a heterosexual population that say is committed to or claims to be committed to monogamy or looking for monogamous arrangements or relationships. Okay, talk a little bit about marital satisfaction over time, because this is an issue that we have in the United States, in our culture today. Is half of marriages, over half of marriages, are going to end in divorce, right? And we can take a look at marital satisfaction over time. As the years progress, satisfaction in a marriage typically tends to go down equally by the time we get to year 10 there, for the husband and the wife. And it seems like it's going down pretty much at the same rate for both. Just at the end, men and women kind of catch up in terms of their satisfaction. So, of course, these are averages across a number of studies. This doesn't happen for everyone. There's going to be it would be only natural for there to be some leveling off point. Eventually you get past that type of passionate love. The honeymoon period kind of is over, and you have real life stressors like jobs and mortgages and kids and all of that other stuff that you need to worry about, and that can cause some disagreements in a relationship. One of the biggest issues in why relationships don't last is either a lack of communication or just poor communication skills. The communication patterns that we're most likely to see in troubled relationships are the negative affect reciprocity. So essentially, someone's acting pissy, so you're going to act pissy right back, right? Give it right back to them. And then they're going to give it right back to you, and you're going to give it right back to them. And essentially, it's just a cycle that never gets broken, right? At some point, somebody needs to change course. If someone's pissy, try to respond in a non-pissy way, right? And just don't keep doing that tit for tat, back and forth type of negativity. Another pattern is that demand withdrawal pattern. So this is essentially where people will make particular demands of their partner, and then basically give them the silent treatment. So there's this period of making these demands, making these ultimatums, and then not communicating at all, shutting down, right? These two patterns of communication tend to be pretty good predictors of divorce or the ending of a relationship or partnership. So some basic approaches to try to reduce the negative effects of conflict, because conflict is inevitable in the relationship. Whenever you have two people interacting, conflict is normal and healthy if done right. One way to help reduce the negative conflict or negative effects is to increase rewarding behavior in other aspects of a relationship. So little classical conditioning in a sense there, or operant conditioning if we're talking about rewards, and punishments. Don't do punishments, but rewards are good. Try to understand the other point of view, the other's point of view. So perspective taking is a huge one. And identify relation enhancing attributions. In other words, don't make the fundamental attribution error, right? That this person is acting a certain way because they're an asshole, or because they're unkind, or because they hate me, or try to find other attributions, other ways to explain what's going on in the relationship, so you could actually understand what's happening. And once you understand what's happening, then you can start taking steps to address those things. Okay, but again, 50% of marriages will end in divorce. One of my thoughts on that is that we live in a very disposable society. We buy things that are kind of expected to break, and we throw them out instead of trying to fix them, right? There was a time when there were places you would bring your TV to go get fixed, or you would bring a toaster to go get fixed. But now we live in a very materialistic, disposable society, and I think we kind of treat people that way too. So when your marriage breaks, just throw it out and get another one, right? It's not as easy as that, of course, right? There's lots of things going on, but I think that has some something to do with it. It's just kind of our mentality now. Let's get a new one, right? Get a new and a better one, the latest model, if you will. So when a relationship ends, this can be really difficult for both parties involved. Typically, one person is going to be affected more, right? It's definitely easier to be the one who's dumper than the dumpee, right? So the ability to cope with divorce or ending a relationship, a long-term relationship, depends on the nature of the loss. So what do we mean by that? Well, the extent to which the line between yourself and the other has become blurred. So if your self-concept is kind of wrapped up in with this other person, then you're likely going to have a harder time when that person's no longer there. And this is why, a lot of people will say it feels like, like part of me's died inside, or that I'm not the same person that I was without them. And, this idea of blurring yourself with another, it's good and it's bad, right? It's bad because situations like that. Also, the interdependence of the couple and their investment into their relationship. So, predictor of both long-lasting relationships and really difficult breakups are how much the two people were interdependent, right? So, again, interdependency is good for a relationship, but it's also bad for a breakup. Makes it much more difficult. The good thing is divorce tends to be the lowest point in terms of life satisfaction or happiness, right? So taking a look at years before and after a divorce. So here we all are, happy as can be. Then we see, a steady decline in life satisfaction leading up to a point where, either one or both people can't take it anymore. So the divorce will happen, right? Actually, the divorce happens here at this point. So it's really at the uptick of life satisfaction that divorce happens. You reach your lowest point, and then you start realizing, things need to change. I'm miserable in my life. And sometimes this is where, people will start having an affair. They might try to change their physical appearance, might try to do something, differently. And partner tends to notice these differences. They know that this person is kind of like improving in a sense, right? Or trying to improve themselves in a sense. Then the divorce will happen, and from that point, life satisfaction will increase. It'll get better. Doesn't reach where you were 8 years before the marriage, but it's certainly nowhere near as bad as it was at the time of the divorce, or where you kind of reached your breaking point, in a sense. So, yeah, divorce really sucks and tends to, again, be really difficult for both people involved, but it gets better, right? And in fact, by the time a divorce happens, most people are probably already on the path of increasing their life satisfaction, doing things differently. Okay, that's it for this material. Hope you found it interesting, useful. Please read the chapter for some more detailed information. Like I said, I'm not feeling very well, so there are some things in there that I might not have went into a whole bunch of detail with, even though I still managed to talk for an hour and a half. But Okay, I'll see you for the next one. Take care, everyone.